Ellie Dwyer had spent years baking warmth into the town's mornings, but one old Christmas card was about to melt the calm she'd carefully built. The smell of maple scones and cinnamon rolls drifted out onto Main Street, inviting the sleepy town of Willow Creek into wakefulness. The first snow of December had frosted the sidewalks just enough to crunch underfoot, and Ellie had already shoveled a path leading up to her bakery, Maple and Hearth, just as she did every morning since inheriting the storefront 10 years ago. Behind the counter, she wiped her hands on a red checked apron and waved through the glass at Mr. Sam, her elderly neighbor who lived alone 2 doors down. A veteran of more winters than most folks remembered, he walked with a slight limp and the patience of a man who had seen far worse than cold weather. When he stepped inside, the warmth and scent wrapped around him like an old quilt. "Still using Joe's ginger molasses recipe, aren't you?" he said, his voice a little gravelly but soft with fondness. "Wouldn't dare change it," Ellie replied, setting a paper bag in front of him, "and I added a little extra spice, just like she did that year you two tried to outbake the church ladies." Mr. Sam chuckled. "She always said this place wasn't built on flour, said it was built on kindness. Thought she was joking." "Guess not." Ellie smiled, but it was faint. As Mr. Sam left, his bag tucked under his arm like a treasure, she turned toward the back room. Her fingers lingered along a shelf lined with faded photos and recipe cards in Aunt Joe's looping cursive. A small wreath hung from the office doorknob, one Joe had made from bits of ribbon and pine cones. The bell above the front door jingled again. This time, the chill that entered didn't melt as easily. Martha Dwyer, Ellie's mother, stood in a tailored winter coat, her gloved hands clasped like she was at a funeral. Behind her came Caleb, Ellie's older brother, whose confident steps left no footprints. He never stayed long enough for snow to settle on him. "We were just in the area," Martha said by way of greeting. Ellie nodded, not offering coffee. "The bakery's busy this morning." Caleb glanced around, nose slightly lifted. "You still haven't remodeled this place?" "I like it how it is." Rachel, Caleb's wife, entered quietly behind them. She offered Ellie a small, almost apologetic smile, but said nothing. Martha's gaze settled on a display of gingerbread trees. "Well, I suppose it has character." The visit was short, but long enough for Martha to suggest Ellie should consider moving closer to family. Perhaps Caleb could take over the building if she ever needed a change. Ellie simply nodded and changed the subject. When they left, she exhaled slowly, the silence settling back in. That's when Nora stepped in, bookshop owner, unofficial town archivist, and Ellie's oldest friend. "I found something," Nora said, tugging a paper from her coat. "In one of Joe's old books. Thought you should have it." It was a Christmas card, hand-painted. Inside, in Joe's unmistakable script, a single line: "The truth will find you, Ellie, just like you found me." Ellie stood motionless, the card trembling in her hand. Joe had written this, but what truth? And why now? That night, after closing the bakery and finishing the books, Ellie returned to her apartment above the shop. Maple, her golden retriever, followed her faithfully from room to room. In her bedroom, she opened the bottom drawer of her desk, searching for wrapping paper. Instead, her hand brushed something plastic. It was a DNA test kit, one of those at-home kinds, given out last year during the community health fair. She'd tossed it in the drawer and forgotten about it. She turned it over slowly. The card's message replayed in her mind. Minutes later, in the quiet hum of her apartment, Ellie sat at her kitchen table, swab in hand. She followed the instructions carefully, sealed the tube, and dropped it into the prepaid envelope. Maple rested her chin on Ellie's knee as if sensing a shift in the air. Ellie looked down at her, then toward the box sitting on the counter. She slipped on her boots and coat, then walked to the corner mailbox under the glow of the street lamp. The snow had started again, gently, like sugar dust. Ellie mailed the kit and paused at the mailbox, heart oddly unsteady. As she turned back toward the bakery, she whispered to Maple, "What if the truth changes everything?" The email subject line read, "Your DNA results are in." Ellie clicked, expecting nothing, yet bracing for something. The bakery was still quiet, the first batch of croissants baking slowly in the oven, casting a buttery warmth through the narrow kitchen. Outside, the town was waking sluggishly, holiday lights blinking against a gray December sky. Maple sat curled on the rug near the heater, occasionally lifting her head at the distant sound of snowplows scraping Main Street. Ellie stared at her laptop. Her fingers hovered, then clicked. The site loaded slowly. She sipped lukewarm coffee. A few more clicks, and then there it was, a clear, bright message. Biological mother Joanna Ellis, not a match with Martha Dwyer. Joanna Ellis, Aunt Jo, not aunt. Mother. Ellie froze. The clink of her spoon against the mug startled her more than the words. She read them again, then again. She wasn't sure how long she sat like that, reading the same lines until they blurred into one blurry truth. Everything she knew about where she came from wasn't. Maple nudged her knee, sensing the shift. Ellie reached down blindly, stroking soft ears, her other hand still gripping the mug. By the time the timer for the croissants beeped, the shock had settled somewhere behind her ribs like frost. She turned off the oven, plated the pastries, and moved through the motions of opening the shop with practiced ease, as if the world hadn't tilted beneath her feet. But when Nora walked in around mid-morning, Ellie couldn't pretend anymore. Busy? Nora asked, pulling off her gloves. Sort of, Ellie said, voice thin. She waited until Nora had set down her bag and accepted a cinnamon bun before sliding the laptop toward her. Nora squinted at the screen. Read. Then looked up sharply. Oh, she said. And again, oh. I don't know what to do, Ellie said softly. It makes no sense. Why would Jo raise me as her niece? Why would Martha? Nora shook her head. Jo always kept her own counsel. But there might be more, Ellie. Town records, maybe. Something in her papers. You should talk to Mr. Franklin. Ellie blinked. The lawyer? Nora nodded. He handled Jo's will, and he was her friend. Old-fashioned, but kind. If there's more to this, he'll know. That afternoon, Ellie made the short walk to Mr. Franklin's office, a small converted bungalow tucked between the post office and the diner. He answered the door himself, as he always did, wearing a sweater vest and slippers that suggested retirement hadn't quite reached him. He invited her in without question. When she told him what she'd found, he didn't look surprised, just tired. I knew this would come someday, he said, adjusting his glasses. Jo made me promise to let you find it in your own time. So it's true, Ellie whispered. He nodded once. Jo was your mother. She gave birth to you when she was barely 20. It wasn't a scandal, it was just quiet. She loved you fiercely, but your father was gone, and Martha, well, she offered to help, said it would protect Jo's career, your future. Jo never meant for it to be forever, but Martha, she grew attached, and Jo let it stand. Ellie felt something collapse inside. Why didn't she tell me? She tried, he said. Letters, cards, hints. But Jo believed in preparation. She left you what she could. Papers, proof. She told me, let Ellie find the truth when she's ready. Then she'll know it's hers, fully. Ellie's mind spun. Is there anything I should see? Mr. Franklin rose slowly, walked to a filing cabinet, and returned with a slim envelope. This is her handwriting, her words. You can read it when you're ready. Ellie accepted it with trembling hands. Back at the bakery, she tucked it into her desk drawer. She wasn't ready, not yet. Instead, she returned to work. The oven, the flour, the measuring cups, they gave her something solid to hold. As dusk fell, the bell above the bakery door rang. Ellie looked up and blinked. Rachel stood there, cheeks pink from the cold, hands tucked nervously into her coat pockets. I saw your mom at the diner, Rachel said quietly. She was tense. I imagine she will be, Ellie replied, trying to keep her voice even. I don't know everything, Rachel went on, but I know something's been wrong for a long time. You were always the one Jo leaned on, the one who actually listened. Ellie looked at her wary. Rachel hesitated. Caleb always said you were too quiet to matter, she said. But Jo, she listened to you more than to anyone, I noticed. I just never had the guts to ask why. Ellie said nothing. Rachel offered a small smile. If there's anything you want to talk about, I'm here. Even if it's just over tea and silence. Outside, the streetlights flickered on, casting a golden glow across the snow-covered sidewalk. Inside, the bakery felt smaller somehow, cozier but charged. Ellie watched Rachel disappear into the evening, then turned off the lights one by one. She reached into her drawer and touched the envelope again. She wasn't sure what tomorrow would bring, but she knew the quiet wasn't going to last. Outside, Rachel quietly says, "You're not imagining it. I've always felt you didn't belong there." Ellie thought she was chasing answers, but now the trail led to something bigger than just the truth. Snow continued to fall over Willow Creek, softening the rooftops and painting the sidewalks in clean white. The bakery windows were fogged with the warmth inside, glowing gently under strands of golden lights. Ellie stood behind the counter with flour on her sleeves and something heavier pressing on her chest. The unopened envelope from Mr. Franklin. It waited in the drawer like a held breath. She didn't open it, not yet. Instead, she pulled out Joe's old holiday cookbook, the one with butter-stained pages and margin notes in looping cursive. She flipped through it absently, half searching for comfort. Her fingers paused on a children's section tucked in the back. Easy sugar cookies, holiday popcorn balls, things she and Joe used to make together. There, slipped between two pages, was something unexpected, a folded sheet of yellowed paper. She opened it. "My daughter Eleanor," it began. "If you're reading this, it means you're ready. Or maybe you just need to be reminded of who you are and who you come from." Ellie sank into the stool behind the counter. Her fingers trembled. "I didn't give you up. I gave you time. I tried to be close, to teach you in the ways I could. This bakery, this was always yours. They didn't understand that. But you will. I couldn't protect you then, but I can leave you the tools to protect yourself now." Tears welled up, unexpected and hot. She folded the letter gently, placed it beside the envelope in the drawer, and let herself cry. Not loud, not long. Just enough. Later that morning, Rachel returned. She looked more determined than Ellie had ever seen her. Boots laced tightly, scarf askew, hair pulled back like she didn't care how she looked anymore. "I found something," she said without greeting, pulling a worn ledger from her tote bag. "It was in Caleb's old briefcase. I don't think he meant to leave it behind." She set it on the counter and flipped it open. Names, numbers, property details, mostly mundane, until one entry caught Ellie's eye. Maple and Hearth Bakery listed under Family Trust, signed Martha Dwyer. "Joe left the building to you," Rachel said softly. "But this looks like they tried to redirect it. I don't know the legal part, but I know what Joe told me before she passed. She said you were her legacy, not Caleb, not Martha. You." Ellie stared at the page. Her heart pounded in her ears. "They filed this months after she died," Rachel continued. "Martha told me it was just paperwork. I didn't know they were hiding anything. I didn't ask. I didn't want to ask." Ellie looked up. "But you're asking now." Rachel nodded. "I'm done pretending." For the first time, Ellie saw something new in her sister-in-law's eyes, not just regret, but resolve. "I also found this," Rachel said, holding up a tiny gold locket. "Joe gave it to me years ago, said I'd know when to pass it on. It's yours." Inside the locket was a photo of Ellie at 5, holding a gingerbread man nearly as big as her head. Beside her, Joe laughed, flour on her cheek. The moment was frozen, unguarded, unmistakably maternal. That evening, Nora closed the bookstore early and came by the bakery with 2 mugs of cider and a small tin of lavender shortbread. "I heard," she said, sliding the tin toward Ellie, "and I brought this too." It was a newspaper clipping, one Ellie had never seen. "Local woman joins National Bakers Guild." Joanna Ellis recognized for community impact. The photo showed Joe in the shop's doorway, one hand resting on the sign above. "She used to talk about building something real," Nora said, "something no one could take away from her, from you." Ellie looked down at the table, at the cookbook, the ledger, the letter, the locket. "This is no longer just about me," she said slowly. "It's about what she stood for." Rachel, seated across from her, lifted her eyes. "Will you stand with me?" Rachel nodded. "I already am." Ellie didn't plan to start a war. She just wanted the truth to stand, even if it trembled. The Willow Creek Town Hall smelled of pine needles and hot cider. Strings of white lights hung from the rafters, and folding tables overflowed with casseroles and pies wrapped in foil. The Winter Lights potluck was one of the last town traditions that hadn't changed in decades, and tonight it pulsed with chatter and clinking plates, a familiar warmth layered over years of memories. Ellie stood near the back, a tray of gingerbread scones, balanced on her arm, heart beating far faster than any recipe required. She'd worn her cleanest apron and her quietest courage. Rachel stood beside her, coat open, belly rounding beneath a soft sweater, her expression calm and unblinking. They had rehearsed nothing. There was no speech, just the truth, ready to be spoken. Mayor Kemp called for attention with a polite clang on his coffee mug. "Let's hear it for our favorite bakery," he smiled. Ellie Dwyer, Maple and Hearth, 10 years of keeping us sweet and caffeinated. There were claps, a few cheers. Ellie stepped forward slowly. "Thank you," she said, voice steady. "This bakery was built by Jo Ellis. You all knew her as Jo. She was my aunt." She paused. "But she was also my mother." A hush fell. Somewhere near the back, a fork clattered onto a plate. "I found out only recently," Ellie continued. "Through DNA results, through town records, through the words she left behind. Jo gave me this life, and she left behind something more. A legacy. One that was meant to be mine. One that was almost taken." Martha's voice cut through the quiet, sharp, and cool. "Joanna was not in her right mind those final months." Heads turned, some nodded, some frowned. "I disagree," Ellie said gently. "Jo knew exactly what she was doing. She left letters, records. She left people who witnessed it." Rachel stepped up beside her. "I was there too. Jo was clear. She didn't raise Ellie out of guilt. She loved her. She chose her." Martha's mouth opened, then closed. Caleb across the room shifted uncomfortably. "Jo left the bakery to Ellie," Rachel continued. "She told me. And more than that, she left her the values that built this place: community, honesty, work worth doing." Mr. Franklin rose slowly from his seat near the front. "Joanna Ellis filed her will with me. I notarized it, witnessed it. She left everything to Ellie, intentionally, completely. Any attempts to override that are, well, they won't stand up." The silence that followed was different now. Not tense, thoughtful. From the third row, Mrs. Patterson stood, a cane in one hand, a plate of deviled eggs in the other. "Jo brought pies to every potluck for 30 years, she said. "She dropped off casseroles when my husband was sick, and she taught my granddaughter how to bake shortbread when no one else had the time. She'd be mighty proud of you, Ellie." Others murmured in agreement. Someone clapped softly. Then more followed. Ellie blinked, heart full and aching. She hadn't expected this, not all of it. She caught Caleb's eyes. He didn't smile, didn't nod, just stared. As the potluck resumed, Ellie stepped out into the cold, breath fogging the night air. A pair of boots crunched behind her. She turned. Caleb stood there, hands deep in his coat pockets. "You've made your point," he said, voice low, "but don't think this makes you one of us." Ellie met his gaze without blinking. "I never was, and that's exactly why I had to speak. Some families hand down heirlooms. Ellie inherited silence, and now, something better." The snow had thickened overnight, coating Willow Creek in a white so dense the rooftops seemed to sink beneath it. Inside the bakery, however, color bloomed, rows of frosted cookies, sprigs of holly in jars, and children's drawings taped along the window, candy canes, gingerbread houses, stick figure reindeer with lopsided grins. Ellie stood at the prep counter, rolling out dough with Jo's old rolling pin. The wood was worn smooth from years of use, and though it had gone missing after Jo's funeral, it had mysteriously reappeared days earlier, delivered in a plain brown box with no return address. Just a note: some things find their way back. Across from her, Kayla and Denny, two teenagers from the high school, shaped cookies into bells and mittens. "Do these go to the nursing home?" Denny asked. "They do," Ellie said. "Every resident gets a cookie bag with a handwritten card. Want to help with those next?" Both nodded. The baking class had started small, just a holiday project for bored kids during winter break. But word had spread. Now the shop buzzed in the afternoons, flour on noses, laughter in the air. It wasn't just baking. It was something more, something that felt like building. The bell above the door jingled. Rachel entered, cheeks pink, scarf askew. She carried a worn book in one hand and a paper bag in the other. You brought the recipe book, Ellie said softly. Rachel nodded, setting it down. I didn't want to hold it anymore. It's yours. Ellie opened the cover, Joe's name written in ink, and beneath it a line Ellie had never noticed before. For Ellie, the best thing I ever made. Something caught in her throat. Rachel reached into the paper bag and pulled out a batch of lemon scones, slightly overbaked but earnest. I used the recipe. I think I got it right this time. Ellie took a bite. It wasn't perfect, but it was close, and it was hers. Caleb's still not speaking to me, Rachel said, pulling off her gloves, and Martha hasn't returned my calls. But I'm okay. Ellie nodded, then turned to the teens at the table. Denny, Kayla, can you label the treat bags? As they busied themselves, Ellie leaned in. There's something else. I'm starting a foundation. Joe's table, small grants, mentorship, space for local businesses. Rachel blinked. You're serious? I'm tired of protecting something in secret, Ellie said. It's time to build in the open. Rachel smiled slowly. You know, Joe used to say that. You can only grow what gets sunlight. That evening, Nora hosted a reading at her bookstore. The fireplace crackled, and townsfolk sat bundled in coats with cups of cider. She read excerpts from Joe's old journals, reflections on baking, community, regret, and hope. She once wrote, Nora said, adjusting her glasses, you don't need applause to know you did something good. Sometimes it's in the silence after a meal, the way someone lingers longer than they planned. Mr. Franklin added a memory of Joe walking a neighbor's dog every morning when the owner fell ill. Mr. Sam shared how Joe fixed his porch swing without being asked. As the evening wound down, Rachel turned to Ellie and whispered, Can I ask you something? Of course. If it's a girl, I'd like to name her after Joe, or maybe Marie, her middle name. Ellie blinked, heart stuttering. She'd have loved that. Later, as they locked up, the cold pressed in and the sky threatened more snow. A delivery van idled outside the bakery, and a young man stepped out carrying a familiar box. Ellie signed without thinking. Inside the box was Joe's rolling pin, again, but this time Ellie already had it. She pulled out the card attached to the second box. It read, Some things don't just find their way back. Sometimes they multiply. On Christmas morning, Willow Creek woke up to snowflakes and something softer, healing. The town was quiet, hushed in that sacred way only holiday mornings could manage. When even the wind seemed gentler, the church bells more melodic, and the world somehow paused between breath and memory. The snow had fallen all night, covering everything in a clean white layer that made even the oldest corners of Main Street look new. Inside the bakery, warmth bloomed from the oven and the laughter of a dozen voices. Ellie had closed Maple and Hearth for business, but opened it for something better. A Christmas brunch for her baking students, a few neighbors, and anyone who needed a place to be. The long oak table pushed to the center of the shop held a modest feast, cranberry scones, scrambled eggs with fresh dill, roasted sweet potatoes, and the lemon scones Rachel had finally perfected. Rachel herself moved carefully, hands resting against her back, as she eased into a chair. Her baby bump was more pronounced now, visible even beneath the oversized cardigan she wore. She smiled at Ellie across the room, then reached for another biscuit with the ease of someone who felt at home. Still not quite as good as Joe's, she said, breaking one open, but they're getting closer. Ellie laughed, tucking a dish towel over her shoulder. You say that every time, and every time you get closer. Near the fireplace, Mr. Sam dozed in a rocking chair, a half-eaten cookie balanced on a napkin in his lap. Across from him, Kayla and Denny debated how many mini marshmallows counted as too many in hot chocolate. Nora sipped coffee and folded paper snowflakes to tape to the bakery windows, humming along with Bing Crosby on the radio. The door opened with a jingle. Everyone turned. Caleb stepped inside, his coat dusted with snow, a small wrapped box in hand. Ellie met his eyes. He looked uncertain but not cold, hesitant but not angry. I brought this, he said simply, offering the box. Not a peace offering, just a start. She took it, unwrapped it slowly. Inside was an old photograph, Joe holding a baby in her arms, seated on the front step of the bakery. Ellie hadn't known the picture existed. She kept it in her desk, Caleb said. I found it the other day. Figured it should be yours. Ellie studied the photo, then looked up. You don't have to say anything. I know, he said. But I will, I'm sorry. The room had grown still. The smell of cinnamon and orange zest hung in the air like memory. I didn't get it, Caleb continued. Why she chose you. I thought I deserved it. The building, the business, the legacy. But I didn't build any of it. You did. Ellie didn't speak right away. She reached for his hand instead. No one wins here, she said softly. But maybe we can stop losing. He nodded. It was enough. Just then, the bell chimed again. Martha entered, slower than usual, face drawn. She held a small tin in one gloved hand. I brought Joe's butter cookies, she said, voice hushed. Well, my version. Never quite got them right. Ellie nodded once. You're welcome to join us. Martha sat. She didn't say much, but she stayed. Later, as everyone gathered near the bakery's front windows, Ellie stepped outside for a moment. She looked up at the new sign hanging above the door, freshly painted just last week. Joe's Table, where community rises. She smiled. Inside, the laughter of children rose. The radio played Have Yourself a Merry Little Christmas, and the scent of vanilla and cloves spilled into the snowy street. She stepped back in and poured 2 fresh cups of coffee, one for Rachel and one for Mr. Sam. As she set the mugs down, Mr. Sam leaned close and whispered, Your aunt's smiling somewhere, probably correcting your dough technique. Ellie laughed, wiping her hands on her apron. That's how I know she's still around, she said. The quiet moments after Christmas often say more than the gifts we exchange. Ellie's journey reminded us that truth doesn't always arrive wrapped in celebration, but when it does arrive, it can heal more than we ever thought broken. In a world that moves quickly to judge, her story teaches us that kindness, given freely, becomes a kind of inheritance that outlasts resentment. Just like a warm kitchen on a snowy morning, simple goodness has a way of finding its way back to those who give it. If this story has stirred something in you, perhaps today is a good day to pass along a bit of warmth, no ribbon required.